Dublin, 1986. A surveillance operation closes in on a quiet neighborhood. Garda, Irish police, burst into an apartment in Clontarf to find heroin packets scattered on a table, one of the largest heroin seizures in Irish history at that time. The man arrested is Christy Kinahan, a well-dressed 29-year-old Dubliner. This moment, a massive $117,000 haul of heroin, marks the rise of a drug kingpin who will later be dubbed the Dapper Don. It's the beginning of a criminal empire that will reign over Ireland's underworld for decades. But Christy Kinahan's story starts years before that bust. Born in 1957 to a stable family, his father managed a dairy farm. Christy didn't come from destitution. In fact, unlike many gangland figures, he was relatively well educated and even drove a taxi in his early years. Yet the young father of two hungered for more than an honest living could provide. By the late 1970s, he had ventured into petty crime, burglary, car theft, forgery, chalking up his first convictions before age 20. This ordinary Dublin lad was slowly metamorphosing into something else, a clever, ambitious criminal with his eyes on bigger prizes. As Dublin's inner city struggled with poverty and drugs in the 1980s, heroin became an epidemic. Kinahan saw opportunity. By the mid-1980s, he had quietly become one of Ireland's major heroin suppliers, networking with suppliers and outsmarting rivals. The 1986 Clontarf seizure, at the time a record haul, put him behind bars for 6 years, but it also cemented his underworld reputation. Media would later nickname him the Dapper Don, likening him to New York's infamous John Gotti for his suave appearance and ability to evade serious convictions. He was no street thug. Christy Kinahan was calculating, polished, and patient. Kinahan served his prison term in the late 1980s, but incarceration did little to slow his ascent. In some ways, it sharpened it. Behind bars, Christy capitalized on his time. He earned 2 degrees and even learned to speak Spanish and Russian. Fellow inmates saw a quiet man immersed in books, not realizing he was preparing for a new era of international crime. By the time he refused early release in 2001 just to finish a degree, Kinahan had transformed himself into a multilingual, educated crime strategist. Not the typical gang boss at all, as Irish papers later noted. His education would prove invaluable for what came next. The 1990s brought the Celtic Tiger, an economic boom in Ireland, and with newfound wealth came surging demand for drugs. Cocaine began flooding Dublin's party scene, and various gangs fought deadly turf wars for control of this lucrative trade. While Kinahan's early focus had been heroin, he had the foresight to pivot. After a brush with the law in 1993 over a cache of stolen checks, for which he fled Ireland while on bail, Christy lay low. In 1997, he was dramatically arrested at his own father's funeral in Dublin, an outstanding warrant finally catching up with him. He was jailed again, this time for 4 years on the check fraud charges. This might have been the end for some criminals, but for Christy it was an opportunity. In prison, he refined his plans, emerging in the early 2000s with a grander vision: to build an international drug pipeline beyond the reach of Irish authorities. To understand the Kinahan Cartel's rise, one must understand the fallout from a single event: the 1996 murder of journalist Veronica Guerin. Guerin's assassination by drug traffickers shocked Ireland and led to the creation of the Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, a unit dedicated to seizing criminals' wealth. Under intense heat from CAB, many Irish kingpins fled abroad to keep their fortunes. Christy Kinahan was among them. Sensing that staying in Dublin was now too risky, he upped sticks around the year 2000 and relocated his operations to the sun-soaked haven of Spain's Costa del Sol. He and other gang leaders set up shop in places like Marbella and Amsterdam, where they could run their businesses from afar. This exile was strategic. In Spain, Kinahan was out of cabby's reach and off the Irish tabloids' front pages. And crucially, in those early years abroad, he kept violence to a minimum, a calculated move to avoid drawing attention from Spanish law enforcement. Through the late 1990s and 2000s, Christy Kinahan quietly consolidated power. While gangland feuds raged on Dublin streets, from the lethal Westies gang in West Dublin to the Crumlin Drimnagh feud, Kinahan stayed in the shadows, supplying many sides with drugs. Rival Irish gangs were killing each other in record numbers. Some years saw over 20 gangland murders. But Kinahan's crew was different. They became the wholesale suppliers, the shadowy brokers. By the mid-2000s, most of Ireland's drug traffickers were effectively working for the Kinahan Cartel, whether they knew it or not, distributing ported cocaine and cannabis and kicking up profits to the big boss abroad. One Irish assistant police commissioner would later describe Christy's growing network as a huge crime conglomerate that had reached an unprecedented size and power in the Irish underworld. Christy embedded himself on the Costa del Sol, living in a luxe villa in Estepona worth millions. Fluent in Spanish, he blended into the expat high life. He forged ties with Spanish smugglers, North African hashish suppliers, and even established routes for Colombian and Mexican cartels, and the Russian mafia to push drugs into Europe. If cocaine was the gold of the new century, Kinahan positioned himself as one of its chief European prospectors. Ireland was a key market, but not the only one. The Kinahan reach extended to the UK and mainland Europe by the late 2000s. While Christy managed logistics abroad, trusted lieutenants, some of them childhood friends from Dublin, handled distribution and kept order back home. Violence was used sparingly and strategically. In these years, Christy's name rarely made headlines. He was the invisible hand moving multi-million euro shipments of cocaine and cannabis, while other gangs took the heat. By 2010, law enforcement across Europe had begun to grasp the enormity of Christy Kinahan's enterprise. That year, Operation Shovel was launched, a massive international crackdown on the Kinahan Cartel. In May 2010, coordinated raids in Spain, Ireland, and the UK nabbed over 30 suspects, including Christy himself. At long last, it seemed the elusive Dapper Don was cornered. Spanish police hauled Kinahan in, and newspapers splashed stories of an Irish godfather taken down on the Costa del Sol. But the victory was short-lived. To the amazement of many, no significant charges stuck. Christy spent only a few months behind bars in Spain before walking free due to lack of evidence. Operation Shovel had rattled the cartel, but ultimately failed to land a knockout blow. Christy Kinahan returned to his villa and his business as usual, likely more cautious but also more confident that his low-key, sophisticated model could withstand even international scrutiny. By the end of the 2000s, the Kinahan Cartel had risen from Dublin streets to become a global juggernaut. Christy Dapper Don Kinahan, once a small-time burglar, was now, according to Irish authorities, the head of the most powerful organised crime group Ireland had ever seen. His organisation sat atop an estimated $1 billion empire built on drugs, fear and corruption. With a foothold in Ireland, the UK, Spain and beyond, the stage was set for the next chapter, the expansion under the next generation of Kinahan, and the inevitable challenges to their throne. It's the late 2000s on Spain's Costa del Sol. Luxury yachts bob in Marbella's marina, and high rollers sip champagne at beachfront clubs. Behind the glitz, Christy Kinahan's cartel is thriving in the shadows. Having survived Operation Shovel, the Kinahans now supercharge their global expansion. This era will see the cartel morph into a transnational drug and arms powerhouse, with alliances spanning continents, and Christy's eldest son, Daniel Kinahan, stepping forward as the new face of the empire. By the early 2010s, Daniel Kinahan was taking over day-to-day operations of the family business. Groomed by Christy, Daniel had learned the trade young and inherited his father's smarts and ambition. He was nothing if not bold, and he had a passion that would define this chapter of expansion: boxing. But before the boxing rings and Las Vegas fights, Daniel cut his teeth in the cartel's core business: drugs, guns, and money. Under Christy's guidance, he helped strengthen partnerships with other underworld titans. The Kinahan Cartel became a key player in what Europol later called a European super cartel, a consortium of the biggest drug lords cooperating to dominate the cocaine trade. Kinahan emissaries struck deals with South American suppliers, including allegedly El Chapo's Sinaloa cartel in Mexico. They linked up with Italy's Camorra and 'Ndrangheta, British crime families, Dutch kingpins, Moroccan hashish smugglers, even paramilitary groups like Hezbollah, anyone who could help move product or launder money. This was organized crime on a global scale: cocaine from Colombia and Venezuela, cannabis resin from North Africa, Precursors from Asia all found their way into Kinahan pipelines, snaking through ports in Spain, Rotterdam, Antwerp, and beyond. With drug profits soaring, the cartel diversified into arms trafficking. Guns were the lifeblood of gangland power, and the Kinahans ensured their foot soldiers and their allies were well supplied. They sourced AK-47s, submachine guns, pistols, and grenades from conflict zones and black markets, smuggling arms alongside drug shipments. In one UK case, a Kinahan lieutenant named Thomas Bomber Kavanagh stockpiled a cache of 11 deadly firearms, including assault rifles, as part of a plot to curry favor with authorities, a scheme that ultimately failed, landing him additional prison time. The cartel's gun running wasn't just for profit. It fortified their influence among other gangs by acting as an armorer and made sure they could eliminate rivals or traitors decisively. Europol reports later linked the Kinahan group to murders in at least 4 countries, illustrating how violence was a tool that extended far beyond Ireland. As the drug money poured in, Christy and Daniel expertly laundered the illicit fortune. They invested in property, villas in Spain, Dubai high-rises, and set up front companies across the world. In Dubai, where the Kinahan presence was growing, Daniel and his brother even established companies trading in food, clothing, and consulting, often with local partners to gain legitimacy. Money moved through offshore accounts and cash couriers. Some funds may have gone through the Hawala system in the Middle East, informal value transfer networks that leave little trace. The goal was to turn dirty cash into ostensibly legitimate assets. By the mid-2010s, the Kinahans had entrenched themselves in the United Arab Emirates, particularly Dubai, which offered a luxurious sanctuary with no extradition treaties covering their crimes. Cartel money was also funneled into businesses in Africa and Asia, truly a global laundry cycle for their euros. Despite this sprawling criminal enterprise, Daniel Kinahan sought something more: respectability and public influence. Boxing was his vehicle. In 2012, Daniel co-founded a boxing management company in Marbella, originally known as MGM, Macklin's Gym Marbella, and later rebranded as MTK Global. This wasn't a vanity project. It was a shrewd move to intertwine the Kinahan empire with a legitimate sport. MTK Global quickly signed dozens of fighters, including world champions. Daniel, who had a genuine love for boxing, became an advisor to fighters and began rubbing shoulders with the sport's elite. By the late 2010s, Daniel Kinahan was a power broker in boxing, arranging high-profile fights and managing big names. He was photographed with heavyweight champion Tyson Fury and veteran promoter Bob Arum, and he courted the likes of UFC star Conor McGregor, even if that feud was more tabloid fodder than serious beef. For a while, it seemed Daniel had pulled off an incredible double life. As one crime analyst noted, by 2020 he had become one of the most influential figures in the boxing sport, all while Irish courts identified him as a key cocaine and firearms trafficker behind the scenes. This strategy of mingling with the legitimate world paid dividends. Daniel cultivated an image as a businessman and fight organizer, which gave him political connections and a sheen of credibility. It also served the cartel. Boxing events provided cover for meetings with other criminals, and maybe even a route to launder money via event revenues and fighter management fees. At one point, the Kinahans were so emboldened that in February 2016, they hosted a lavish Clash of the Clans boxing event at Dublin's Regency Hotel, with Daniel present, a decision that would soon have bloody consequences, to be continued in Part 3. But up until that fateful event, the Kinahan name was not widely known to the public outside of crime reporters. Daniel largely kept to the shadows, often described only as a MTK advisor, while MTK Global's public heads insisted he had officially stepped away from the company in 2017. Behind closed doors, though, his influence was unmistakable. In 2020, WBC President Mauricio Sulaiman bizarrely praised Daniel Kinahan for improving boxers' lives, a sign of how deeply Daniel had woven himself into the fabric of the sport. And when Tyson Fury thanked Dan for securing a major fight deal in a video message, it sparked outrage in Ireland that a crime boss was being openly celebrated in sports media. Even as Daniel pushed the Kinahan brand into new arenas, the core business of the cartel kept booming. Europol and police agencies were seeing record cocaine shipments hitting Europe year after year. By now, the Kinahans were known as pivotal players in importing these drugs, not necessarily owning every shipment, but acting as key brokers and facilitators. One international investigation revealed the sheer scale: 3 tons of cocaine, 700 kilos of cannabis resin, and even a custom-built narco submarine seized in Spain were all linked to a Kinahan-driven network. The cartel, working with other groups, could summon literally shiploads of cocaine from Latin America. In Ireland, police noted an insatiable appetite for cocaine that the Kinahans and others were feeding. The gang's wealth and reach had become so vast that by the mid-2010s, authorities dubbed them a transnational criminal organization, an Irish mob gone global. However, with great power came great enemies. The Kinahan Cartel's expansion wasn't unchallenged. Other crime families envied or resented their dominance. Chief among them was the Dublin-based Hutch gang, led by veteran thief Jerry the Monk Hutch. For years, the Kinahans and Hutches coexisted in an uneasy peace. Rumor has it they even collaborated on certain heists and shared profits in the past. But tensions simmered. Daniel and his brother built their own crew of loyalists in Dublin, while the Hutch family had its own criminal interests. The Kinahans had also made internal enemies. Occasionally, a trusted associate fell out of favor, and Daniel, less diplomatic than his father, was not one to forgive a perceived betrayal. By 2014-2015, whispers in the underworld hinted at a looming storm between the Kinahans and Hutch factions. The spark would come from within. Gary Hutch, Jerry Hutch's nephew, had been an ally of the Kinahans, working with them on the Costa del Sol. But something went sour. Reports vary, but Garda sources later said the Kinahans grew suspicious that Gary Hutch was skimming money or even acting as a police informant, a claim believed to be false. Worse, they thought Gary plotted to assassinate a Kinahan lieutenant in a dispute. Daniel Kinahan's response was deadly. A hit was ordered on Gary. An attempt on Gary's life failed in 2014, leading to frantic negotiations between the Kinahan and Hutch families. In a remarkable deal, the Hutch side paid a large 6-figure sum, hush money, to the Kinahans to spare Gary's life, and Gary agreed to leave the drug trade. For a time, it appeared the issue was resolved. Gary returned to Spain, thinking the slate was clean. But the deal was a trap. On the morning of September 24, 2015, as Gary Hutch exercised by a swimming pool in Miraflores, Marbella, a gunman chased him down and shot him dead. The Kinahan Cartel had betrayed the peace agreement and murdered the 34-year-old Gary in cold blood. It was a brazen betrayal that would light the fuse on a war. By late 2015, word of Gary Hutch's execution, essentially at Daniel Kinahan's behest, reverberated through Dublin's underworld. Jerry Monk Hutch was reportedly devastated and furious at his nephew's slaying. Quiet, calculating Jerry began plotting revenge from the shadows. The stage was set for a deadly feud that would explode onto international headlines and ultimately threaten the very existence of the Kinahan Empire. February 5, 2016, Regency Hotel, Dublin. It's mid-afternoon at a boxing weigh-in event for an MTK-promoted fight. The lobby is crowded with fans, families, and fighters. Among the crowd is Daniel Kinahan, attending the event he helped organize, surrounded by his associates. Suddenly, a man disguised as a woman in a wig pulls an AK-47 from a handbag, while across the room, gunmen outfitted in fake police tactical gear storm in with rifles. Pandemonium erupts. People dive for cover as gunfire echoes through the hotel's halls. The target is clear, the Kinahan contingent. When the chaos subsides, Daniel Kinahan is nowhere to be found. He narrowly escapes unharmed in the melee. But one of his close associates, David Byrne, lies dead on the marble floor. Byrne, a 34-year-old Kinahan lieutenant, was riddled with bullets in front of dozens of witnesses. The Regency hotel attack was like a scene from a movie. But it was brutally real, a retaliation by Hutch-aligned hitmen for the murder of Gary Hutch. It was the opening salvo in what became Ireland's bloodiest gangland feud. And for the Kinahan Cartel, it marked the beginning of their downfall. The Hutch-Kinahan feud that erupted in 2016 would leave a trail of bodies and attract unprecedented law enforcement attention. Just 72 hours after the Regency attack, the Kinahan side struck back. On February 8, 2016, Eddie Hutch Sr., Gerry Hutch's older brother, was gunned down at his home in Dublin's north inner city. He was unarmed, an easy target. Assassins pumped bullets into him in retaliation for David Byrne's death. Over the next weeks and months, a tit-for-tat cycle of murder gripped Dublin. The Kinahan hit teams, often young men on mopeds or stolen cars, faces masked, roamed the streets, hunting anyone connected to the Hutches. They killed Noel King-Size Duggan, a longtime friend of Gerry Hutch, in March 2016, as he sat in his car. In April, they shot dead Martin O'Rourke, a young man mistakenly identified as a Hutch associate, in broad daylight. An innocent victim caught in the carnage. Michael Barr, who had unknowingly helped the Regency hit squad, was executed at a pub in April 2016. In May, Gareth Hutch, Gerry's nephew, was murdered in his apartment parking lot as he buckled his child into a car seat. By the end of 2016, at least 11 men lay dead in this feud, most of them shot in the head on Dublin streets. The once shadowy Kinahan Cartel was now front-page news daily, its violence exposed for all to see. The sheer brazenness of the Kinahans during the feud stunned Ireland. It was as if Daniel Kinahan and his cohorts were trying to send a message, or perhaps scrambling to quash the Hutch threat through terror. But each killing only steeled Gerry Hutch's resolve for revenge. He and his network struck back where they could, though more of the bloodshed was Kinahan on Hutch. By 2017, the toll had climbed. 18 lives would be lost to the feud by 2021. The Irish public, watching this mob war play out, grew both fearful and angry. And the Garda, who had long faced criticism for not doing enough against big gangsters, launched an unprecedented crackdown. Specialized task forces were set up, armed officers patrolled vulnerable neighborhoods, and the government poured resources into stopping the cycle. For the Kinahans, this intense heat was something they had largely avoided when they operated from abroad quietly. Now they were labeled Ireland's public enemy, such a one. International authorities also started closing in. The Kinahan-Hutch feud had spillover outside Ireland. Gerry Hutch was killed in Spain. A Kinahan hit team planned to kill Hutch family members on the Costa del Sol. Even Spain's Guardia Civil and Interpol were drawn into the case, sharing intel with the Irish. The Hutch side wasn't innocent either. In 2018, Hutch associates in Spain were caught with a hit list targeting Kinahan leaders, a plot foiled by Spanish police. The European authorities, now fully aware of the Kinahan presence in their backyard, began cooperating in ways never seen before. This narco-terror on EU soil simply could not be ignored. Meanwhile, key operatives of the Kinahan Cartel started falling. In August 2017, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, effectively the Kinahan's UK boss, was arrested after NCA agents found 23 kilos of cocaine and 8 guns linked to his crew. He was later sentenced to 21 years in a British prison for drug trafficking, a major blow to the cartel's UK branch. Other trusted lieutenants met grim fates. In September 2018, hitman Freddie Thompson was convicted in Dublin of a feud-related murder and sent to prison for life. Irish and Spanish police also targeted the cartel's money men. They raided properties, seizing luxury cars, cash and ledgers. The noose was tightening around the Kinahan organization. However, the leadership, Christy, Daniel and Christy Jr., remained elusive, sheltered abroad. By 2017, all 3 Kinahans were believed to be in Dubai, enjoying the high life in a city that, at the time, offered them a safe harbor. Daniel continued to dabble in boxing from afar and reportedly held meetings with other cartel figures in the UAE. It seemed like the Kinahans might weather even this storm by lying low overseas. That turned out to be wishful thinking. As the feud raged, pressure built for a coordinated international response. In April 2022, that response came. In a dramatic press conference in Dublin on April 12, 2022, flanked by Irish police and Europol officials, the US ambassador to Ireland, Claire Cronin, announced US sanctions against the Kinahan Cartel and something even more staggering: a $5 million bounty on each of the 3 Kinahan leaders. The Kinahans were now formally designated by the US as a significant transnational criminal organization, their bank accounts frozen, their names blacklisted worldwide. Ambassador Cronin didn't mince words. The reward was for information leading to the financial destruction of the Kinahan organized crime group, or the arrest and conviction of Christy, Daniel, or Christopher Jr. It was unprecedented for the US government to target an Irish gang, a sign of just how big and international the Kinahans had become and how serious the threat was perceived. In the wake of the sanctions, the fallout was immediate. Dubai, under heavy diplomatic pressure, reportedly froze assets and bank accounts tied to the Kinahans. Their business partners scampered away. Within days, Daniel Kinahan's pride and joy, MTK Global, ceased operations entirely, citing unprecedented scrutiny and inability to continue when its founder was sanctioned. Fighters were left managerless, gyms shut down. The Kinahan name was now poison in any legitimate circle. Tyson Fury and other boxers hastily distanced themselves from Daniel, with public warnings from law enforcement that anyone who dealt with Kinahan was effectively consorting with criminals. The message from the top was clear: no more impunity. These moves dealt a hammer blow to the cartel's finances and freedom of movement. Christy Kinahan Sr., who was about 65 by then, and his two sons suddenly found themselves hunted men. The US, Irish, British, and EU authorities had formed a multi-country task force laser-focused on dismantling the Kinahan enterprise. As one Irish assistant commissioner put it in 2023, the Kinahan Cartel has been substantially degraded by successive operations by Irish, British, Spanish, and US authorities. Years of investigations were now bearing fruit. Over $2 million in cash was seized in Ireland in various raids. Properties worth far more were confiscated or frozen. Even the Kinahan's legendary ability to hide money was meeting its match as financial documents and encrypted phone messages from networks like EncroChat were intercepted. EncroChat, an encrypted phone system favored by criminals, had been secretly compromised by European police in 2020, yielding a treasure trove of evidence. Among the intercepted chats were communications of Kinahan operatives coordinating drug shipments and hits. This intel directly led to high-profile arrests. In 2023, Liam Byrne, one of Daniel's most trusted men and the head of the Kinahan faction in Ireland, Josh UK, was lured out of Dubai and arrested in Spain while dining with family. Byrne, whose own brother David was the one killed at the Regency, was wanted for weapons trafficking. The UK's NCA had evidence, thanks to EncroChat, that Byrne and an associate were sourcing pistols and submachine guns for the cartel. Irish police hailed Byrne's capture as a particularly significant development in the effort to dismantle the Kinahan gang. Alongside him, a younger Kinahan associate, Jack Kavanagh, no relation to Thomas Kavanagh, coincidentally, was nabbed in a Dubai airport transit, caught trying to slip away to Turkey. One by one, the dominoes were falling. Law enforcement on multiple continents were now in daily cooperation. A senior Garda officer in 2023 noted that agencies from the US to Colombia to the UAE were sharing intel like never before. Relationships we never had before. Now we can pick up the phone anytime, day or night, he said of the new United Front. The Garda even expanded liaison posts to Dubai and Colombia, embedding officers to coordinate the hunt. The Kinahans, who once exploited international gaps, found no safe haven. Christy Kinahan was reportedly forced to flee his luxury Dubai base and move frequently. There were sightings of him in places like Zimbabwe and Oman, looking for refuge, but nowhere is truly safe with a $5 million tag on one's head and the combined might of Western law enforcement in pursuit. By 2025, the mighty Kinahan Cartel is a shell of its former self. Assistant Commissioner Justin Kelly stated the gang is no longer the dominant force it once was, and has been largely degraded by relentless operations. Their drug routes and contacts still exist, but many have been taken over by others or disrupted. Crucially, the Kinahans' ability to orchestrate violence has been blunted. Their hitmen are dead or jailed, their bankrolls under siege. We have made it difficult for the Kinahan leaders to fund or organize any hit teams again, Kelly explained, noting that assassinations require big money and logistics that the cartel can no longer easily muster. Indeed, the once unending feud with the Hutches finally petered out, as the Kinahan side could not sustain the campaign of murder under intense police pressure. In a twist of fate, Jerry Hutch was put on trial in 2022 for the Regency Hotel killing of David Byrne. But in 2023, he was acquitted due to lack of evidence, walking free from court while the Kinahans remained in hiding. The Irish police, however, have not forgotten the Kinahans' many crimes and vow to pursue them to the end. "We will continue until the cartel is dismantled," Commissioner Drew Harris has pledged. Today, Christy Kinahan, now in his late 60s, and his sons Daniel, mid-40s, and Christopher Jr. remain fugitives, believed to be laying low in the Middle East. The US State Department's $5 million rewards still stand, and over 600 associates and suspected collaborators have been barred from entering the United States as part of the crackdown, a testament to how far the US is willing to go to isolate them. The Kinahan family's empire, once a well-oiled machine pumping drugs across Europe, is fractured. Many of their closest allies are imprisoned, from Irish gunmen to British smugglers, thanks to joint investigations. Internationally, their old partners in crime have largely cut ties to avoid the spotlight now shining on the super cartel. But the story isn't over until it's truly over. The Kinahans have proven resourceful in the past, surviving arrests, betrayals, even gangland wars. Irish authorities caution that while severely weakened, it would be naive to think they're out of business entirely. Still, the momentum is against the Kinahans now. Fortune no longer favors the Dapper Don. The man who once strode freely in Marbella and Dubai now has to look over his shoulder at every turn. From humble Dublin origins to a global crime empire, the Kinahan Cartel rode a wave of greed, violence, and audacity to the very top, only to find law enforcement and vengeful rivals waiting there to knock them down. In the end, the Kinahan saga is a cautionary tale, a story of power and hubris, of a criminal dynasty that rose from the streets to build a narco superpower. They left in their wake countless lives ruined by drugs, a trail of bodies from Dublin to Spain, and a legacy that authorities are hell-bent on erasing. As of this narration, the net continues to close. It may take time. As one detective said, dismantling the Kinahan cartel will take a lot of time and painstaking work, but the writing is on the wall. The fall of the Kinahan cartel is underway, piece by piece, and justice, slowly but surely, is catching up with the Dapper Don and his sons.